All right, so it's 11 o'clock right on the dot. We've got a few people on the line, so we can go ahead and get started. I just wanted to welcome everybody to our webinar, Superintendent Cybersecurity Role, You're Accountable to Your Community. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items. All attendees are muted and their videos are off, but if you would like to ask a question, you can use the chat feature or raise your hand to our panelists and we'll get your questions answered. This webinar is being recorded and the recording will be sent out as well as listed on our YouTube channel. And for today, to get started, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Bill Spakowski and Ken Garcia, our Education and Services Directors, and Chuck Orrico, our Executive Vice President. So now I will hand it over to you guys. Go ahead.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our seminar this morning. I want to take a moment and go over the agenda. We'll talk about our overview and the objectives of this webinar, as well as we'll talk about the risks schools are facing, and I will talk through that section. And then I'll hand it over to Chuck, and he'll talk about developing a framework for your district cybersecurity program. And then last but not least, we'll have Ken Garcia talk about the superintendent's role, lead, as well as outsourcing IT security. Is that right for your organization? And then we will wrap up at that point in time with questions and answers. Next slide, Jordan, please. A little overview of diopath in our K-12 practice. We do have verticals that we specialize. 50% of our revenue is in the K-12 space in public education, as well as we do support some higher ed. About 30% is in commercial and 20% is in government. For those of you that are familiar with us in the state of Illinois, we are the largest we are the largest K-12 service provider in Illinois and growing rapidly across the nation as we've expanded into Texas and Ohio and Michigan and some of the other markets across the country. Over the past year, we've been able to display some excellence in distance learning, and it's one of our core competencies. As well as part of our K-12 staff here at diopath is made up of former superintendents, principals, teachers, and folks that were part of technology staffs within school districts. We also have a top secret security clearance for the U.S. government. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about those things later in the presentation. So what do we hope you get out of this? Well, first and foremost, during the past year, technology and the requirements for technology in e-learning and in virtual learning have grown dramatically and rapidly. And with that growth, it's introduced a great deal of risk with cybersecurity than we've ever seen before in education. And I think one of the things I want to point out about that as well is this is not going to stop because we bring the students back in the buildings. The tools that we've turned on for virtual and e-learning are going to continue to grow in education, and therefore we have to keep that in mind. We're also, I believe, because of some work we're doing with school districts across Illinois and in Texas, is that we're seeing that once students are coming back into the classroom, there's still a hybrid learning environment that's required. So there are going to be those students, whether they're in high school or middle school, that may continue to be part of your learning community, but doing it remotely rather than face-to-face. And I think that will also continue to escalate the risk and the requirements for a well-defined cybersecurity program. Also, as a superintendent, we want to make sure that you walk away from this with the understanding and that this really stops and starts with you as a leader of your organization. Your cybersecurity program clearly is going to fall on your shoulders as you represent your educational community. And lastly, we hope that you walk away with this understanding that cybersecurity needs a framework and a program and is not solely the responsibility of the IT department, but it's a responsibility of your educational organization and community. So what are schools facing today? This is really kind of scary. We've seen that since 2016, there's been 1,180 school incidents reported, and that number is up 72% in the last 24 months. And I'm sure everyone's aware of the highly visible accounts that have been out there, whether it be, we saw about Baltimore community school districts and the things that are happening there. There's also a website that we put out here, and again, we will be sending this out to you where you can see the breaches. But if you look at that little map and you see all the dots all across the country of districts that have reported incidents, not all have. So I'm sure this number is much larger than what we actually know at this point in time. And as far as ethical hacking and assessing the results of that, we've all done those phishing campaigns, and we understand that part of cybersecurity is not just the technology and the tools, but it's human behavior. And we have to identify where we can help individuals understand what's happening when they do get an email or they're providing personal data electronically. And what staggered when we were doing some research on this is that there's been over 1 million student identities stolen since 2017. Now, when we think about that, the thing that's staggering the most about it is about 2.6 million total loss from that number, and about $540 million were paid out by individual families. So as we start to think about that, and in education, we talk about making our students career and college ready. But when we talk about cybersecurity and protecting their identity, and we're really not only talking about college and career ready, but we're talking about lifestyle and being ready for life. And imagine the student that comes out of high school and goes to purchase their first car, and then they find out that their identity has been stolen and they have bad credit. It's scary. It's scary, the world that we're living in. We've seen security breaches go up in the past 8 months, and a lot of it due to COVID. We noticed that there's a lot of student information being sold and predators getting. That is up 81% since last March. And some of the cause of that is that 70% of the households in the United States have at least one child that is doing online gaming. And again, I think it comes back to our role, as a community leader and a community thought leader, to make sure that we're putting the right things in place in our school districts to support not only safeguarding that information, but providing better knowledge and better instruction on what is good digital citizenship. So where should you start? Well, I think a key part is adopt the right mindset. Learn as much as you can about cybersecurity, and you'll see that there's correlations with just about everything. And when you're adopting the right mindset, remember, it's not just an IT problem. This is an organization problem. Make a commitment to learning as much as you can in the basics of cybersecurity. As a leader, no one's expecting you to understand and know all of the details that are required, but you need to have a high level view of what cybersecurity means and what steps you need to take. And then make sure you're simplifying wherever possible. Remember, complexity is the enemy of cybersecurity. The more complex you become, the more easy it is to intrude from different places. Also, start with a risk assessment. And remember that what you're managing is risk. And you're not eliminating risk, but you're managing it. And more importantly, remember that this is not an investment. This is a practice that you have to participate in and make part of your organization's health. Discuss cybersecurity often. Discuss it with everyone. We work with a lot of districts that do parent universities, and make sure that they're talking to their community, their parents, their staff, their students, and discuss it and talk about it as often as you can. As a leader, what should you know? you should know where your data is and how it's being transmitted. You have to assume that any data that's being transmitted electronically has the opportunity to be breached or compromised. We worked with a district and who will remain nameless, but we were doing a security assessment for them. And we all know that we have new applications that we're using that are cloud-based, for IEPs and student information systems, and some of those are a little bit more secure. But what we found is that there was personal identifiable information that was used before migrating to the newer applications that are still stored out on servers. And probably a good example for you to think about is, I'm sure you're all familiar that years ago, the IEP systems were Word templates that we shared around with our staff, and then they got stored somewhere on a server in our district. And what we found is that some of that data is still out there, and where it is stored is not necessarily following best practices. So make sure you understand where your data is. Understand your compliance requirements. What data is out there? How do we have to protect it? What's required? And again, those types of things are not an IT function, that's an organization function. Understand your legal issues. Also understand from a compliance standpoint, based on what type of insurance you have, what that insurance requires you to do in order for them to support you if there is a breach, or more importantly, when there might be a breach. Remember, it's not if, it's when. What is your plan for response? If you have been breached, how are you going to communicate this to your stakeholders, your community, your parents, the Board of Education? You've got to set some type of governance and oversight about this. And that's really important to understand, how are we going to respond? And for those that are in Illinois and also in Texas, there are state legislation that has come out that starting July 1st of 2021, that if there is an incident, you are required to report and communicate that breach to your stakeholders. So make sure you have your plan around that. And then lastly, disaster recovery and business continuity. Where are your systems backed up? How are they being backed up? Where is it stored? Do you have SLAs if you're using cloud-based systems? And more importantly about where it's stored, and if there is a breach, how fast do you need it back online? And we talk about business continuity, that's really what we're talking about there. Are you identifying what are critical applications that need to be back online within a certain period of time? And a great example in education is, we all understand the pain around payroll, and we understand the complexity around payroll. But if you are breached and you lose access to your payroll system, how soon do you need that back up so that you continue with those types of functions? Or your student information system, which includes a lot of your busing information, and it's the end of the day, and we need to know what bus students need to get on. I mean, think about how soon we need these applications back up and running if there is an incident that happens. And the other thing about disaster recovery and business continuity I'll talk about is that we don't practice it. We believe we have it, but we don't practice whether or not we can restore. And I think that's something that you need to know and understand. One of the things we've seen over time is that schools do a great job with physical security. You need to parallel that physical security process and programs just like you would in the cyber world. You've involved many community partners in the assessment, including local law enforcement and other experts. You conduct site assessments annually and on a regular basis. You've got an integrated plan based off of those assessments for your emergency operation plan. And then more importantly, you conduct assessments in other areas of the school, whether it be the buses, the storage, the sports venues, and common routes near the school. So again, as we talked about earlier, the parallels between physical and cybersecurity are important, and schools are really good about the physical. We need to take that rigor and apply it to the cyber world as well. And this comes back to that point about your mindset. You need to change your mindset. You need to start to understand more about this. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Chuck.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Bill, for setting the table for us on what, as superintendents, we really need to be thinking about from a strategic level. And I know that it may seem like the first few slides tried to put the fear in all of us of saying that security is just becoming more and more of a monster, and what on earth are we going to do? However, which is important. It's very important that we all understand the significance of security. But the good news is there is a path forward. And the main emphasis on that is that even though the bad actors out there who are trying to compromise our infrastructures on a daily basis, they have become more and more advanced and very specific. But the good news is the cybersecurity incident prevention industry has also matured significantly, exponentially, in fact, and not just from a technology tool set standpoint, but also from the processes and the standards and the regulations that we've come up with. So take heart in knowing that there is a path forward, and that the security community, companies like Diopath and others, who are all banding together to try and come up with better and better defenses every day, they're becoming more connected. We're on tons of forums together, we're on tons of roundtables together, constantly looking at emerging best practices and technologies. And so as a result of that, because that's the business that we are in, you as superintendents can benefit from that as well. The tool sets are also maturing significantly. Your intrusion detection systems, your intrusion prevention systems, your perimeter security, your email security, they're all advancing at an exponential rate, which is great for all of us. And the really good news is security programs are really becoming more affordable. As we all know, technology costs have come way down over the years, and so has the security industry as well. It's one of the more target-rich industries within IT in terms of the costs, but the costs of security have come down significantly, and surprisingly, they're a lot more affordable than you think from a ongoing monitoring and management standpoint. And so the other good news that we're observing as well, we've been in the security industry for the better part of 17, 18 years now, and we're noticing a very positive and significant trend, not only in the K-12, but in industry in itself, enterprise organizations, and that they're recognizing that security has to be part of the core mission. It has to be on the top of every business executive, every teacher, every superintendent, everybody's mindset has to be security aware, and that at the board level, they must make sure that security is part of their core mission. And as a result of that, we're starting to see that funding has become now more prioritized, and K-12 budgets are allocating more funding towards security to make them secure as well. And as Ken's going to talk about a little bit later in the presentation, the whole concept of risk avoidance and cost avoidance is very integral part of that whole funding aspect when it comes to your K-12 budgets for security. And then cybersecurity insurance, which is a relatively new product, right? It's starting to really take hold, and it's becoming more affordable as well. And so you may want to consider, if you haven't already, cybersecurity insurance as well. And it's just like any insurance, right? There has to be a return on investment with the amount of insurance that you're going to spend versus what you think the probability of an event will happen. And as Bill just mentioned, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So cybersecurity insurance is definitely a component that you need to be considering. And as part of that, just like any insurance program for a mortgage or anything else, do you have a security information and event management monitoring service? In other words, in simple terms, do you have a service, a person, entity that's constantly monitoring and managing your security for your institution? Because if you don't, that's something that you significantly need to consider and investigate as well. Okay, Jordan, next slide, please. So if you're like me, I have run some very, very large organizations in my time, as well as some very small ones. And if I were a superintendent on this call, I would be asking myself right now, okay, that's all fine and dandy. You've hit us with all this information about the vulnerability of my systems and what I should do about it. But if you're like me, I need a framework. I need a roadmap. I know we need to be more secure, and as a superintendent, you know you need to be more secure. But where do I begin? Right? A lot of our clients know they need to be secure, but they don't really know where to begin. And so, developing an overall cybersecurity framework at a high level is extremely important. And as superintendents, you should not be worrying about the type of perimeter security or email security you have. You as a superintendent have to evolve to the role or fulfill the role of, from a due diligence perspective, I have a high level roadmap and understanding of what needs to be done in order to secure my overall organization. You let the technical people and the process people figure out how to implement your overall roadmap, but it really, the buck stops with you to make sure that you have that overall governance roadmap and cybersecurity program in place. So what does that look like? This slide at a very high level, it depicts really what you should be considering, because one of the most common mistakes that we see in a lot of K-12 organizations is their security program initiatives, it stops right after the implementation of technology or after an assessment. And they think, okay, we can wipe our hands of that. We've done an assessment. We've implemented a firewall. We should be good, right? Well, you're not. And we see many organizations perform annual or quarterly security assessments, which is good, but and they'll even remediate some of the findings. But what they fail to do is create or implement an ongoing governance program for the ongoing monitoring management of your overall security posture. And so really what that means is, every good comprehensive security roadmap should include an information security program management plan. Oftentimes we see more on the technology side, the technologists who are running IT infrastructures and who are managing them, they really focus on the technology and point solutions. They love the shiny new pennies and objects from a technology standpoint, but that's not where security starts. It starts with an overall plan. What is your roadmap for the next 12 to 24 months? What are your objectives in trying to secure your organization? Those are business questions that you need to be answering in order to determine what is most important to you as a superintendent and your school board. What are the types of questions they'll be asking you, and how you're performing your due diligence in order to keep your infrastructure secure. So that management plan is critical. And it starts with, what are your security policies? We have to develop our information security policies. We have to develop our plans that support those policies. And then within those plans, you have to have standard operating procedures. And Bill talked about it. If you have an event, if you have a compromise, how do you recover from that event? That's disaster recovery. Okay, that's half of it. But how do you maintain operations while you're still trying to recover from that event? That's continuity of operations. And so what is your disaster recovery and continuity of operations plan? Those are all part of your SOPs or your standard operating procedures. You should then have your information system guidelines and your information technology standards. And these are the guidelines and standards that you're trying to be compliant with. So for example, in the state of Texas, they passed cybersecurity Senate Bill 820, which means that the schools at a minimum have to be compliant with that Senate Bill 820 from a security coordination standpoint, a cybersecurity policy, and as Bill mentioned, they have to report all breaches. So what standard are you trying to be compliant with? Once you've identified that standard, you then need to develop and implement those policies, procedures, plans that will make you compliant with those standards as well. And then equally important are the evidentiary artifacts. So these are critical for passing audits or demonstrating that you as a superintendent have demonstrated good, proper due diligence. And those evidentiary artifacts are used to say, okay, here's my security program management plan. Here are my policies, my procedures, my guidelines. Here's my DR and continuity of operations plan. And when you get audited, or if you don't get audited, well, when you get audited, those are evidentiary artifacts that are proving I am in compliance with what I'm supposed to be doing. If you're not in a state where you're getting audited, if your school board wants to know what in the heck have you been doing to make sure that we don't have a breach or minimize the risk of a breach, or even when you have a breach, you can produce these evidentiary artifacts to say we are doing everything that we possibly can to minimize that. And that's a good position to be in, because the last place you want to be is in the news, or to have your teachers, your parents, students find out about it after the fact. So if you don't have a cybersecurity framework in any particular state that you're in, the good news is companies like Diopath have developed several frameworks that are all based on NIST, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, which is an international standard really for which most cybersecurity and technology standards are compliant with. And it can be customizable for 15, 20 different types of standards that are in the industry today. So if you don't have a standard, it's okay. We can help you with that to make sure that you are. And so overall, the IT governance program makes sure that once you've done your assessment, that you have a plan in place to make sure that you're constantly being in compliant and keeping your security posture as maximum security as possible. Okay, Jordan, next slide. So the security cycle journey. You now have a framework in place. You've developed your cybersecurity plan. What do you do next at a very high level? Well, as I mentioned, once you've got your cybersecurity plan in place, you need to perform regular assessments, whether they're monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, annually. You should perform those annual assessments to make sure that you're staying in compliance with your cybersecurity plan. Once you've performed those assessments and you have identified the results of those assessments, and you can perform those assessments internally, or you can use companies like Diopath to help you with those assessments. But once you've got those results, what training do we need to do to make sure that we shore up those areas of vulnerability and weakness that were identified in the assessment? And that's internal training, it's external training, your teachers, your students, etc. And then once you've done the training, performed the training, you have to go back and update those program and policies and procedures that I referenced on the previous slide to make sure they're still in compliant. Because unfortunately, in security, as we know, with zero-day viruses and with the different frameworks that you need to be compliant with, they're constantly changing. So it can't be a 3-ring binder that you've produced and put on the shelf. You have to use it on a regular basis and continually update it. And then you can then look at your technology and services. And while I sort of de-emphasize the significance of the technology point solutions, the type of firewalls, the new shiny pennies, they are extremely important that you implement the right technology tools that are in compliant with the cybersecurity framework that you developed, right? So that's where you then begin to look at, well, what does our technical infrastructure look like, and what do we need to implement in order to make sure that we are compliant with our framework? And then Bill touched on it, I touched on it, yeah, Kenny's going to touch on it, because we can't emphasize it enough. What is your incident response plan? You have to have a plan in place that if you have a breach, you have an incident, you have to have standard operating procedures, you have to have your escalation procedures, you have to have your public relations, communications, external procedures all documented, so everybody knows what the right and the left hand are doing in the event of an incident, and how can you recover from that incident and maintain operations while you're recovering as well. So that's the overall security cycle journey once you have developed your overall framework. Jordan? Okay, now Ken is going to talk about you as a superintendent. What is your role at the leadership level, which is very important, knowing that you've got this framework in which you can base everything on.
Thanks, Chuck and Bill, and good morning, everybody. So, you know, as we digest all this information and think about frameworks and trying to figure out where is your district today on this journey, and where can you get to? You know, we've heard talking about reducing risk. We've talked about expense or expense exposure. How do you get to a point where we've minimized all of that? We could look our community in the eyes and say, we did everything possible to put our district in the best possible position to deal with cybersecurity. And you know, when I look at it, I try to figure out, you know, simple scale, and this is sort of a 1 to 5, you know, approach here. And looking at it, and I'll start at the left and just say, you know, chaos. You know, this would be a situation where if something happened, you literally don't even know where to begin. You know, you just start making phone calls, trying to figure out, asking the questions, hey, we just got a ransom notice, or we had an issue, I don't know what to do, where do I begin? That's just pure chaos. And obviously in that situation, we have high risk, high expense exposure. And, you know, how do we move up a little bit? As you start moving up and looking at reactive, you know, I would say a lot of districts might already be in this place where, you know, you have some cyber insurance, you know what to do, or who at least to call in the event something happened. But it would be, you know, reactive. You have your firewalls, you have your antivirus, you have some of those shiny pennies, but you're really going to react to some type of event. And, you know, once again, you're slowly reducing your risk and expense exposure, but you're still pretty exposed. Then we move into the proactive part. You know, that's where we are starting the good fight. This is where we are working with our staff. We're trying to train them on phishing. We're communicating to others. We want people to know what's going on. We are looking at our network proactively. We're looking at backups to make sure they're running. We're patching things in a proactive manner. We're not getting a notification saying there's been a breach, now you have to patch. We're really trying to stay ahead of the curve. And I would say this is where typically IT, when they are driving the ship without a true leader, this is normally as far as they can get. And, you know, the question is, how do we continue to reduce our risk and lower our expense exposure on the back end? How do we keep doing that? We move up. And, you know, we take it to the next level, and we look at it as more of a service. And, you know, my mind, when I think about service, I think about focused on delivering a product and an experience. And when we're looking at cybersecurity and what that means, that's not only training, that's helping drive true policy, procedure. We have methodology. We're following all best practices. We are a cyber service organization at that point, where we are truly focused on the end result of having a safer environment, and we're reducing that risk and lowering our expense exposure on the other side. And then the last one, which, you know, is where everybody would love to be. We'd love to help you get there. But this is when you're truly adding value to your community. This is where your community actually looks and turns to the district as the expert, as the authority on security. And this has trickle-down effects where, you know, you think about it, your students educated, your parents are educated, then all of a sudden grandparents come to them asking them questions. Hey, I'm getting this kind of email. What do I do? How do I deal with this? Or should I get antivirus software for my computer? I mean, family and community ask each other about things. And when you're truly adding value, your whole community is aware of security, they're spreading the word, they're teaching others, and they're really mastering the concepts involved around cybersecurity. And it's really awareness. And this is where, you know, I say the superintendent and leadership in setting that pace. This is the vision that we want to collaborate with you on to paint that vision and drive. And that's where we need leaders, you know, within the school districts to drive this message. This is where IT, you know, can only get so far. So this is what we're looking for. And I guess I would ask myself, you know, right now, just where do you guys think you are when you really look at your district? In question, you know, are you truly delivering that value where the whole community is aware and people are looking out for each other? Or are we stuck a little bit at the IT level, or even reactive? And hopefully nobody's in a chaos state. But you know, I would say a lot of organizations fall in that middle area, and we really want to work to help our districts. So the question is, how do we get to the next one? Actually, there's a poll, I think. Did you just submit that, Jordan?
I did. I just sent it in the chat.
Okay, got it. So if you wouldn't mind just asking yourself that question and maybe responding with where you see yourself, I think that'd be helpful. As we continue the conversation, we could maybe address and see how we can get you moving along. Jordan, next slide.
Hey, Ken.
Yes.
I also think it's important to note too that your responses are anonymous, so there's no risk of being vulnerable here in terms of where you feel you are at the maturity level.
Great, thank you.
And Ken, I had a question come in. Can our school district ever be 100% secure from breaches?
Would you like me to take that, Ken?
I would love you to take that, Chuck.
Okay. That's a great question. And I always like to use the analogy of picture your school district being a home in a neighborhood. And you are a burglar and you're trying to find a home that you want to burglarize. And you go to your district and your home is has a steel lock door with 5 padlocks and wrought iron fence in front of it, and in the next district over to you, the next house over to you, is a screen door that's just flapping in the wind with no lock. Well, bad actors and hackers like to try and take the path of least resistance, and so you can spend $25,000, pick a number, 5,000, 25,000, to get your infrastructure 98.9%, 99% secure. You could spend another 2 million and you'll get it 99.9% secure. The point is, you will never keep it 100% secure. Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Wall Street, they've all been compromised. There's absolutely no way to get your infrastructure 100% bulletproof. And anybody that tells you they can, don't believe it, because we've all seen the largest organizations in the world being brought down that has the most sophisticated security available. So the point of this answer is that you need to decide as a superintendent, how much do I really need to invest to get to that 99.99% to where that bad actor is going to move on down the road to somebody else. And that's where that cybersecurity framework and that return on investment study to figure out where you need to fall in Ken's slide here, is the proper amount of investment. And that's the best way I know how to answer that question. So it's a great question.
Thanks, Chuck. All right. So, a lot of people, as we talk about cybersecurity, they try to figure out, all right, so I fall at 2.5. How do I get higher up? What are my options? And this is an approach that we look towards to help. And really, it's a question of what can the district do? What can Diopath do? How do we come to a model where we all agree upon and make a very successful partnership? And we try to look at this, and from our perspective, if you want to think about anything, underwater, the iceberg, we look at it and say, all right, so what is below the surface? And what are those tasks which are 100% mission critical, but you don't have the time or want to deal with? You have better things to deal with, but you 100% need them taken care of. And from our approach, we look at that and we say, we should be able to do that for you without a problem. Take that burden off of your plate. And that's where we define and work with you to say, what is that waterline? What are those solutions or products that need to be addressed below that you guys could take care of 24 hours a day and not have me deal with? So we establish a waterline with you, and then above that, we look in that middle area. We look for opportunities to partner. This is where can we work in a collaborative manner to help make an impact. And that could be helping you build your cybersecurity strategy, right? You have a framework earlier, Chuck outlined, but you don't have maybe the leadership that could facilitate that conversation. Can you guys, Diopath, help do that? The answer is yes, but that's where we could work with you to collaborate and figure out strategies for that. You may be wondering, you have an integration model. You may need some help there. We can partner as needed. We can come in. You're moving to your e-learning. Everybody's gone through it, or you need an e-learning review. You might need some expertise. We can partner with you. You may have security concerns there. Your community might have security concerns around those e-learnings. Where can we offer expertise to help you? And that's where partnership starts coming in. And then, if we work together in taking care of, sort of the underwater stuff and making sure that everything's stable, we have a very solid foundation. Then we collaborate together in that middle area, in that sense of working together. Then we move up, and that's where I think the real value is. And that's how we get to that point where we collectively help create that community that is safe, that's aware, where best practices are being used, where we have policy procedure, where everybody in the district knows that if there was an incident, the district is equipped to handle it, communicates very well, we understand it, and it's not a shock to anybody. Everybody's been talking that, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So, from my perspective, and I look at it from a risk perspective, it's all about how you handle things. If you think about any incident that happens within your school, it is about how you react to it and how you manage it. What we're looking to do in partnership with our clients is find a way to create the best possible outcome for all parties and the community to know we did everything we could up front. And then if something happens, we have a solid plan process for it. And then we communicate very well, and we're covered all of our bases. Right now, I know, in a lot of the districts we're working with, we're talking about this. And I think the big mind shift here that I would want everybody to take away is cybersecurity is not an IT issue. It's not, one group. It is a big picture, high level, strategic strategic initiative that needs to start with the leader of the organization. And that's why we asked for, to host this webinar. We wanted to make sure that everybody understands that there's this shift. It's not an IT thing. This is an organizational thing. And it's going to take the full community behind it to make our environment as safe and sound as it can be. So that's what I wanted to share. Chuck, did you want to add?
Yeah, can I just add a comment to that? That was really good. And the comment I think that's germane to what you were just talking about too is we get asked often by superintendents the question of how do I know where to draw that water line? And because the common mistake that we see in K-12, higher education, and even in business organizations is that do they want to be in, do you want to be in the education industry? Do you want, is your main mission in life to get your students to be ready for college? If that's your main goal in life, then you need to understand where to draw that water line. If you want to be in the IT business, you want to be in the cybersecurity business, then that water line goes way down. If you want to be focused more on providing a sound education at the best possible methods for your students, then it's really important that you understand where to draw that water line and to understand what makes sense to outsource to organizations like ours and others, and what you want to keep in-house from a subject matter expertise standpoint. So just wanted to add that on there, Ken, if you didn't mind.
Oh, thanks. That's a great point. And one of the other things that I would just add is, how fast or, do I jump in? How do I start? How do I make it sustainable from a budget perspective? And I think that is a common question, because typically most schools don't have just a cybersecurity operating line item, at least not yet. But it's one of those things where we know cybersecurity continues to grow, and just the exposure gets worse and worse every day, right? We get more and more of these incidents that we hear about, but how do we plan and budget for it? I think that is a conversation that we're having with a lot of the districts. And what I would say is you need to assess first and understand what it's looking, what your current exposure is, what we have, what risks are there. And then we need to build a strategic plan. And once again, this starts at the top, the strategic plan and what that looks like with an appropriate timeline, and then work together to get budgets in there and make it sustainable. So just something else that, I was thinking about as we're talking through this.
Ken, do you mind? There's a point, we've been talking a lot about cost and mitigating cost and mitigating risk. And one of the things maybe we haven't really pointed out throughout this is there's also an academic cost for your students. And if we are impacted, it's not just the ransom we're going to have to pay. It's not what it's going to cost to get our data back. There's also academic loss that happens. When we look at some of these schools that have been breached, they've lost 2 weeks of working with their students, providing e-learning, providing education. And I don't know how we can put a cost around that, and that's something that we also have to be aware of as we're looking at our framework is what is that academic cost? I mean, we're coming off a year where we're seeing academic loss of 5 to 8% nationally, versus the year before. And as we start to see more negative impact by breaches, that's going to continue to impact us. So I think that's a non-tangible cost, but we have to be aware of that.
Hey guys, I had another question come in. The question is, are we more at risk with online learning and flex learning now that COVID is happening?
If you don't mind, Chuck, I'll jump in, and Ken, the answer is yes. And I think some of the statistics that were shown, early on in the presentation is that in this environment we're in right now, the bad actors are recognize that students are working more virtually than they used to be. Okay, they realize that they might be working from home versus in the classroom and inside of your network. So the risk is greater.
Bill, just to add on to that from a risk perspective, you know, being remote, I think the biggest challenge is people are getting exposed to newer tools now. They're not as familiar with them. Behavior of certain tools changes, and it's changing rapidly. And the peers or the peer connection has sort of broken a little bit, where, you know, in the past you get something, you can ask your neighbor in the hallway, hey, did you get that notification? In this case, a lot of people are moving really fast, and they're not always reading everything. They're not comparing things like they used to. You know, they're not having that daily you know, coffee and hearing the story about somebody doing something wrong. So I think that's where some of the risk is as well.
And if you guys don't mind, I'd like to add on to what you both just said, because you know, COVID and working remotely, specifically, what it has done is it's accelerated the digitalization of business processes. So a lot of what Ken was just talking about in terms of how you go about your normal day has now become automated. And so endpoint mobility, the expansion of cloud computing in most organizations has now become digitalized, automated, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It has accelerated where the industry was going already. The problem is, and it's a great question, is most security organizations within internal and security organizations, they can't keep up with the new vulnerabilities that these changes, these digitalization of business processes are bringing, because it's starting to reveal a lot of legacy thinking and technologies in the way that we used to operate. And so it's a very good point, and it just brings to the forefront the need to make the importance of having a good overall cybersecurity program, because you're now dealing with business processes that have become digitalized and automated.
Great. Well, if anyone has any more questions, you can send them now through the chat. And if not, then you can send them to email or to our solutions email afterwards. So I'll just wait a few seconds if anyone has any questions. All right, well, I don't see anything coming through yet. So I just wanted to thank everybody for joining our webinar today. A recording will be sent out and also listed on our YouTube channel. If you'd like to attend any of our additional roundtables or webinars, they're all listed on our events page on diopath.com. So thank you everyone for joining, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Have a great day.